Lyft raised a total of $4.9 billion over the last 10 years. At one point, Lyft threatened to stop Uber in its tracks and take over the leadership of the US ride-hailing market. With countless controversies surrounding Uber, Lyft had started making a name for itself. Uber was so scared of Lyft that it even devised a full-blown spying and corporate espionage project to counter Lyft. So why is it still valued at less than $4 billion right now, which is $1 billion less than the cash it raised? Why is its growth rate on a downward trajectory? Why does it only have less than 30% of the US market share after more than a decade? Why is it laying off more than 30% of its staff?
Since you guys went public, it's been quite a rough ride.
Yep.
Yeah.
The story of Lyft began when Logan Green was a student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He had been using Craigslist to share rides on his way to meet his girlfriend in LA. But he was always anxious because he knew nothing about the driver or his co-passengers. At the same time, on the East Coast, John Zimmer, an analyst at Lehman Brothers, discovered a different but adjacent problem to Green's. On his car ride from upstate New York to New York City, he noticed that 80% of the seats on the road were empty, leading to unnecessary congestion.
For the last half century, we've built cities around cars. No one even thought about the economic, environmental, and social problems they were going to cause in the future.
Green decided to act on it first, and so in 2007, he created a long-distance intercity carpooling company called Zimride for college students. And it so happened that Zimmer saw Green's Facebook post about Zimride and became instantly fascinated with the idea. The two men connected and soon became partners.
When we're shut off in our cars, we're shut off from each other. We weren't meant to live stuck on highways in zombie mode. Yeah. What if we could create the next form of transportation? Something that can solve some of the big issues while connecting people on the way.
Zimride was doing well, but the founders wanted to do something even bigger. And so, in summer of 2012, the Lyft app was launched as a subsidiary of Zimride. And in 2013, buoyed by the initial success of Lyft's short-haul ride-sharing model, they decided to fully focus on Lyft and sold the original Zimride service to rental car giant Enterprise. Lyft's mission was to help people go places faster and easier, while also reducing traffic and carbon footprint. And on the back of multiple rounds of funding from several investors, Lyft began to expand to every corner of the country. But it was soon about to crash into some major setbacks. Like in July 2014, when it had to delay its launch in Brooklyn and Queens, forced by the Supreme Court, since it allegedly violated taxi and limousine laws. This was just the beginning. Lyft's rivalry with Uber had started taking shape. Its only real competitor had devised a top-secret Project Hell to spy on Lyft using fake accounts. Uber's brand ambassadors would order Lyft rides and try to persuade Lyft drivers to join Uber instead. The rivalry further intensified when Lyft's COO, Travis van der Zanden, joined Uber and allegedly stole Lyft's trade secrets. Yet the real reason why Lyft seems to be losing to Uber are completely different. When Lyft came into existence in 2012, Uber was already in the market for 3 years and quite popular. At the time, Uber only had limos in its fleet, and drivers were all professionals. So Lyft decided to craft a more captivating story. It used a casual and friendly approach that enticed the younger generation. In fact, Lyft riders were encouraged to fist bump their drivers on entering the vehicle, sit in the front seat, and have a chat. Also, the big goofy pink mustache on every Lyft ride gave it a unique and distinctive look.
The mustache is like a smile. Oftentimes passengers then smile and drivers smile. And then we had the fist bump when you get in the front seat of the car.
It had very quickly become a significant challenger to Uber's dominance. To add to that, in 2017, Uber was hit by several internal sexual harassment allegations due to the brash culture propagated by then CEO Travis Kalanick.
We saw the Delete Uber campaign, Susan Fowler's blog post that went viral. Ultimately, Travis Kalanick, the CEO, was ousted.
Yeah, last year alone we did nearly 400 million rides. We grew 2.3x. We brought our market share over the last few years from low teens to now over a third of the market. that Lyft has. We have markets over 50% market share for the first time in history.
But after being painted as the bad guy, Uber took a complete U-turn and rebranded. It changed its tagline from "Everyone's private driver" to "Your ride on demand," depicting that it was now more about the customers. Funny enough, Lyft also rebranded. It took off the huge mustache, made the fist bumping less important, encouraged its customers to sit at the back, and even changed its tagline from "Your friend with a car" to "Rides in minutes." It made things less friendly and more businesslike, and to be honest, it kind of lost the unique positioning and differentiation it had worked so hard to create. Lyft basically chose to be a follower rather than a leader. Although I can't outrightly say the rebranding was the cause of the company's failure, it definitely had its effect. And as for marketing, it's a different story, as Lyft just couldn't afford to spend as much as Uber. That's because Uber has raised more than 5 times cash from investors compared to Lyft until now. That's why it could spend $1.7 billion on advertising in 2022, over 3 times more than Lyft. This has a direct consequence on brand recall for Lyft, which in turn impacts its market power, leading to far greater implications.
Uber raises $3 billion, so they have 30 times the amount of capital as us. And they're trying to destroy our business using that money. And that was, to be blunt, it was scary. Someone attacking the business, incentivizing drivers not to drive on our platform.
A lot of Lyft's decisions have to be taken based on moves made by Uber. Let me take you through a short journey of how Uber schooled Lyft on ride prices. Initially, Lyft and Uber were both offering similar prices. In fact, in the first half of 2015, the average cost for a typical Lyft ride was 80 to 90 cents lower versus Uber. Then later that year, Uber pulled a big move and slashed its prices in some cities just to lure in some customers. Lyft couldn't do the same because it just didn't have cash to burn like Uber. Then in 2016, Uber did the same thing, with the spin that it was to help drivers who have less demand during bad weather get more rides. Seeing that it was going to suffer again just like the year before, Lyft also slashed its prices deeply. But unlike Uber, Lyft was literally bleeding and had to quickly revert to its former prices. At present, Lyft's prices are typically higher than that of Uber, and that has had a big impact on its market share, which has stopped growing. Most people would rather just go for the cheaper ride. But there are even more fundamental cultural and strategic reasons for Lyft's stagnation. 90% of startups fail, and even venture-funded startups have a failure rate of 30%. So a startup needs to move fast and break things rapidly to survive and counter competition. But Lyft was just too cautious with its moves.
We're being quite cautious, so I'd say we're going to be, continue to be cautious.
Taking the period after the pandemic as a case study, the 2 ride-hailing platforms had struggled to meet the new increase in user demand because drivers were reluctant to return to the apps. But Uber recovered much faster because it had taken the bull by the horns and invested a whopping $250 million in incentives to lure drivers back in.
We're investing so that our consumer and our rider experience is better, and we can actually bring some of those rider prices down as supply shifts and balances.
By the time Lyft realized how this could impact the overall supply of drivers in the market, it was too late, as many drivers had already jumped to Uber, and so the company's supply problems lingered.
So being nice was to your detriment.
I think in the early days, people misunderstood it as a weakness. We are aggressive, but in our own way. We are aggressively working to treat people right.
The reason for this slow pace can be attributed to its co-founders. They were extremely reluctant to make swift decisions. For instance, in 2018, they discovered a major issue with drivers. With the incentive structure in place, it wasn't really possible for anyone to earn a living solely as a gig driver. So Green and Zimmer assembled their employees to study the issue. During the meeting, they were provided with several viable options to improve driver experience. But the 2 men kept dragging their feet on making the suggested changes. Unlike Uber, which was already taking steps to improve the lives of their drivers.
Look at how they don't be scared, right?
We pay your salary,
You know we're all drivers, right?
Although now these 2 men have stepped down and installed a new CEO, the cautious culture and the steady pace of execution has probably seeped deep down into Lyft's culture, and that probably reflects in its growth ambitions. Lyft refuses to take big bets like Uber. In 2014, Uber announced its food delivery service, Uber Eats. Most people were skeptical about the service, and it initially seemed they were right. But then in 2020, the pandemic came, and since everyone was forced to stay at home, Uber Eats became most people's go-to for food delivery.
Because we're in multiple businesses, both in mobility and delivery, I think we have the kind of business that can perform in all weather.
Uber Eats helped it greatly narrow the losses suffered from the ride-hailing business during the pandemic.
Uber's ride-sharing revenue decreased 43% between 2019 and 2020. Its delivery revenue increased 179%.
Although Lyft did experiment by partnering with Taco Bell in 2017 for late-night taco deliveries, it got blasted by bad reviews from both drivers and customers and had to shut it down soon. In 2018, the two co-founders, Green and Zimmer, called in all the employees for a staff meeting at their San Francisco headquarters. The two men explained to their employees that they were acquiring Motivate, a bicycle-sharing platform in New York, for $250 million. The employees had no choice but to clap. In reality, they had been silently hoping for much greater ambition for a really long time. Besides that, Uber also diversified geographically by aggressively expanding into more than 70 countries. Although it made mistakes and did take huge losses initially, it kept pushing till things stabilized. Lyft, on the other hand, is only present in the US and a few cities in Canada. Before the pandemic, it had considered expanding to Australia and some cities in Europe, but it quietly backed out later. Currently, the company's stock has dropped more than 85% from its IPO, and early this year, Wall Street was utterly disappointed by the company's forecasted earnings. So what does Lyft's future look like? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
And so I would say what's coming is actually maybe the third or fourth hardest thing we've faced in terms of the coming potential recession.
The company has been taking steps to become more efficient. In November 2022, it announced that it will be letting go of 13% of its staff, that's about 700 employees, to cut costs. Then it announced that the two co-founders will step aside, making David Risher new CEO as of April 2023. After the announcement, Lyft stock momentarily rose due to renewed hope from investors. The new CEO used to work at Amazon and Microsoft and was even the first head of product for Amazon. He also spent the past 13 years running a non-profit organization for children, which makes people believe that he could help bring a culture of efficiency to Lyft. One of the very first steps he is taking upon taking over the reins is cutting over 1,200 jobs, which is around 30% of its staff and 50% of its costs. This can definitely help him bring efficiency, but will he be able to speed up the pace of execution? Will he be able to expand faster? Or will the company just run out of cash in the next 3 to 4 years, which is again a very likely scenario? Should it instead look for someone to acquire it? Uber certainly does not need to acquire it. Tesla then? Or perhaps Amazon? Or even Google? Only time will tell. Comment below what you think is the most likely future scenario for Lyft, and definitely subscribe to the channel. This is a very small channel, and I need your support to do more of these in-depth analyses. This will help signal to the YouTube algorithm to serve more of my videos to people like you. Cheers!